Good morning. This is Off the Shelf. I am David Batsoffen, and joining me today to talk about freshwater fishes of Southern Africa, a complete guide, we have Paul Skelton. Paul, good morning. Welcome to you.
Good morning, David.
The first thing I want to know is this a definitive book? Does this contain every single fish? Because if it isn't, then it's an incomplete guide to the fish.
Okay, let me give you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Fair enough.
David, it is a complete guide, but you know that when you produce a book, there's deadline, and there's a lot of moments when you can include or exclude and things like that. Now, with my book and an active science, I will have you know that no sooner had that deadline been met than a week or two later, a little Hiliminki was described. So, technically, it's incomplete at this moment. It is a complete guide, and it's certainly more complete than anything else that's around and available at this moment in time. There are elements out there that we know or we suspect, but you know what? Science is an ongoing process, and you cannot stop. And so it's as complete as it can possibly be at this moment in time.
So complete, but maybe not definitive.
No.
I did not realize that the JLB Institute had been renamed the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity.
Yes. So there's a story behind that, and I'm central to that story. So what happened there, David, was the JLB Smith Institute was an institute established initially by Rhodes University. And in 1980, the institute was absorbed into the Department of National Education, as it was then known, as a declared cultural institution. It remained, therefore, a government-declared cultural institution until 1998-99. At that time, the new dispensation, the new government, was reviewing all declared cultural institutions. And it decided that the JLB Smith Institute was not a cultural institution so much as it was a scientific institution. And so it pulled it into the Department of Art, Science, Culture, Science and
Technology.
Into the Science and Technology Division. And then in 1999, we were placed as a national facility of the National Research Foundation. And under that dispensation, it became necessary to open the doors to all, to the nation. It could not proceed as a narrowly based university institution. And therefore, in order to broaden that perception out there, the public perception and the acknowledgement of what it now was, it was renamed as the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity. I was the director. Yeah.
So we're talking about freshwater fishes of Southern Africa. A complete guide is published by Struik Nature. Struik have some incredible nature books out in this particular under this particular banner, and it's not a small book by any manner of means. Paul, how many species have you recognized here?
Yes, good question, David. About 310, 15 thereabouts. You'll see that some of them are as yet formally undescribed. In other words, they don't yet have a formal scientific name, but they are known to us scientists. And in order, and these, if you look at the history of the complete guide under my name, you'll see it was first published in 1993, then revised very briefly in 2000, when Struik Nature took it over, and now it's over 20 years since that was available. So one expects that a book like this will be around and about for at least 10, if not 15 years before another revision is done. And in order to make it, to take it into that future, as far as we know at this point in time, I decided to include species that we were reasonably confident were in the pipeline to be described or known. And that is, so some of those are yet to be, how can you say, put on their formal stage and so forth. Yeah.
So Shane, there's some poor fish out there that doesn't know who it is, basically. It's been swimming around for eons. It gets caught, it gets looked at. Somebody like yourself and your researchers go, yep, so we've seen it, we'll put it back. But Bob doesn't have a name. And he has to when they say to him, who are you? He goes, I have no idea.
Well, that is a fisher's point of view. Let me give you the hero's point of view, because this book is for, you're correct in what you are getting at there, David. The reality of science is that it's an ongoing enterprise. It does not end. And I'll tell you now that 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I assessed the situation as far as ichthyology, freshwater ichthyology in Southern Africa is concerned. And I said, hold on, we're about 95% there. We know virtually everything that's out there. I was totally wrong. Why? Because technology overtook the science. Or became part of the science. When I mean technology, data technology that I had previously had available to me to analyze and assess and get to places and so forth. And so DNA, molecular DNA analysis came on the scene. Electrophysiology came on the scene. And these new technologies had greater powers of deciding or determining relationships and determining species boundaries and things like that. And so we found ourselves in the last 20 years. So going from 2001 to now, there's something like nearly 100 new species or new entities, new taxonomic entities in that book. And that's tremendous. Eh? That's like a 50% increase in the last 20 years. Now that's huge. And all I will say now is that the technologies are getting better. More than that, the science is improving in terms of human resource availability, in terms of SciHub as a platform for these things, and providing the researchers at universities the means to do the research, to get out there and so forth. And all of those factors mean that we are on a really fantastic path of discovery. And I can tell you now that I've got at least 7 or 8 papers in progress looking at species, new species, things like that. So it's a wonderful career, and it's a wonderful surprise for humanity, for our knowledge of what is out there on the planet.
Now, with birds and with mammals, a lot of the bird books have drawings of the birds. Mammals are easier because a lion is a lion is a lion type of thing. But now, how do you go about obtaining fish images? Do you have to catch them and photograph them? Or are these, what is the process behind putting a picture like this in a book like yours?
David, that is a fantastic question. And the reason I say that is that people just open a book and they see an image and they move on. They like it or they don't or whatever, but they move on. And they don't think for a moment just what's behind that image. And, if you take some of those little fishes or big fishes, and I'll tell you a story about them, but some of those, it's an amazingly difficult to get just a good representation of the fish. You need a good specimen, you need either a good artist All you need some evidence of what its coloration in life was like. Once those colors disappear. So think about that for some of these very rare and difficult to find species, and there are plenty of them. You better have a camera ready. You better know what you're doing. You better be able to say that's different or not. Not every field biologist can do that. So the process is now. If it were me, I'd go into the field prepared for all that. But many of these exhibitions and research projects are around ERA work, or they're around some other expeditionary work, not with taxonomy at the end of the day in mind. They're not out there just to collect the fish for this system. But more and more, this digital process of taking photographs, we've encouraged people and our contacts in that to get good images. And I've got hundreds of images of various species, of which some we've etched out and used because they are better than an artist's depiction. In a few cases, you will see I've resorted to an artist's depiction simply because we did not have adequate digital imagery to use. And so, David, it's a very, very interesting and for me a very essential part of a book of this nature, where you're trying to show the diversity of our fish fauna to everybody who's interested. And to do that, you need, we are visual people. So that's a good question. Thank you.
Now, you mentioned big fish. I mean, how big, I watch some of these TV programs where they go and catch monsters in rivers and lakes in South America. And the thing is about the size, just a tad smaller than a giraffe. Do we have such fish here in Southern Africa?
Yeah. So another good question. Anglers and those who seek to catch big fish and so forth are always after that monster. So there are groups. I've got a little graph in the book. I haven't got the book right in front of me to show you the page, but there is a graph of the size ranges of our freshwater fishes, and you'll see that the biggest in Southern Africa are between 1 and 1.5 meters in length, and that will depend. Their weight will depend on the type of fish, because some are squat and fat, some are slender, eels are very long, and things like that. The biggest fish is in that sort of range. The reputed biggest fish in our area is the bundu, which is a catfish you find in the middle and lower Zambezi rivers. It's an air-breathing catfish related to the sharp-toothed catfish. That you'll find in most of our rivers, and it also gets pretty big as freshwater fishes go. And you'll find monsters below Krabi's Falls. I've seen skulls of, half a meter long, just the head. But so they are pretty big. And I would say from a natural point of view, those are very big. Then we come to a category that you call alien or introduced fishes. And there are a couple there, like grass carp and so forth, that are also reputed to, and carp itself, if you look at the world record for carp, it's pretty big. And so they get quite big as well. And then our yellowfish, there's some nice sized yellowfish. But the biggest fish in the region is reputed to be Labiobarbus kimberliensis from the Orange Vaal system, and it gets to somewhere around 20-25 kilograms. That's a big fish. Yeah.
Is it edible?
Yes. Most of these fish are edible. Most of obviously eating fish is subject to suspicion of taste and all that sort of thing. The European segment of Southern African communities have very distinct taste preferences. There, where freshwater fish are an important resource for the local people, for their protein and so forth, they will eat anything from the tiniest kiliminki to the biggest fish. It doesn't matter. There are very few cultural, there are a few, but very few cultural fish that they won't eat for one or other reason.
When you were researching this book, and I mean, you said it goes back a number of decades from its first incarnation to where it is now. Have you ever found fish where you didn't think that you might? You know, a rock pool in the middle of the Free State off the Orange River that you thought would be devoid of fish, and you find one or two that have survived in that pool. Maybe they were brought down in a flood or something like that.
Yeah. That's another good question, David. You're used to interviewing people. You've got it correct as far as rarity and things like that are concerned. Because the dry areas where there isn't fresh water, let me make a statement that's very self-obvious but not always understood clearly. That in order to have freshwater fishes, you've got to have fresh water.
Yeah.
And in areas where surface water is not readily available, freshwater fishes are scarce for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
In those regions, if you go into the deep Peru, or you go into even the Namib Desert, places like that, there are often little relic spots where water remains. And if in former times those were more connected and so forth, you will find they often have a little relic population of fishes. And probably the one should be interesting is the Kweseb River in Namibia. Now, through the Namib Desert. And it usually dries about the entire course. However, if you go into some of the catchment areas, there are kloofs and deep caves and so forth. And I have records of a kiliminki coming from ponds in those rivers, and they had their things. So, yeah, remarkable, isn't it? I'll tell you another incident that I had in my life. So I was still at the Albany Museum at this time, and I got a sample of fish to identify, sent down from a farmer on the Springbok Vlakte, north of Pretoria.
Right.
And now you say, interesting, this farmer had sunk a borehole in order to irrigate his land on the Springbok Vlakte. And that borehole, he got some fish, and he wanted to know what they were, and he sent
Good grief.
Quite revealing, you know. So, yes, and then you look at a dry river bed that is seasonally flooded, and people will say, oh, you know, yesterday it was dry as a bone, today there are big fish in it. Where did they come from? Well, there are reasons and explanations for that type of thing as well, yes.
Now,
let me just give that, because that's one, if you go to the Kruger Park, you often go off the dry riverbed. But those dry riverbeds, you see elephants digging.
Yeah.
And in the below the surface, there's water flow. And when it dries out, the water level drops. And any fish that might be in that works into this loose sand because they're sandy base. And generally, they keep a pool going. They're wriggling motions. The sand forms a little cavern. And then eventually it goes deeper and deeper. And they survive in those dry rivers under the surface of the sand for the next season. And then when the floods come, often there's a wave of water coming down, and the water percolates into the sand and so forth. People say, oh, they see fish bubbling out of the sand. Well, that's because they've been inhabiting the pools that they form as the water level drops and stuff. So it's fascinating stuff.
It is indeed, and I know catfish are like that. They can hunker down for the longest while, and then the rains come, and all of a sudden, as you say, bang, there's a pond full of catfish.
Correct. They're air breathers. They can also, in fact, you can burn a catfish, an air-breathing catfish, because depend upon that air breathing capacity and so forth. And they are able to survive in swamps and that are deoxygenated and so forth. There are several kinds of fishes with that situation, but there are two groups of real survivors when it comes to desiccated environments. They both inhabit very similar environments, and so I'll mention them all in the one. And the one is the lungfish, and the other are the little notabranchius annual killifish. These are fish you'll find on the Mozambique areas and so forth. Their life cycles are quite different. So the lungfish grows up and lives in semi-arid areas, and when their environment dies out, they, as adults, go into the mud and form. They exude a mucus that forms a cocoon, and they survive in that cocoon in a state while it's dry, and they still carry on breathing because they're air breathing fish. And then when the rains come, they reel out the same fish and so forth. The annual killifish, on the other hand, are very different. They live in these temporary rain pans. They survive in the egg state. They develop, so they breed. When there's water, the adults breed. They lay the eggs in the mud, and the eggs start developing. And they develop to a state where they hold themselves.
Wow.
Ready to hatch. And then everything goes out, the adults die, but the fish survive in that egg state. When the rains come, the eggs then hatch, and they have the shortest lifespan known for vertebrates. How's that? And in some of those ones in Mozambique, and they hatch, and within 2 to 3 weeks they can breed. They are adults ready to breed and continue the cycle. So it's remarkable life cycles and things like that.
You know, I've always wondered, Paul, about nature. If you look at a wildebeest, for instance, a baby wildebeest can run with a herd within 15 minutes. Now you're saying these fish can breed, grow to a point where they can breed in 2 to 3 weeks. Could you imagine if human babies did that? They come out of the in the theater. The doctor looks away, looks back. Where's the baby? No, the baby's taken off down the hallway. And then 3 weeks later, it can populate. It can breed. We think we're top of the pile. We're not. We're way down the evolutionary chain. Personally, I think.
Yeah, David, everything you say is just correct and fascinating. That human beings and many terrestrial vertebrates like ourselves have long lifespans, have long youthful phases where learning and surviving and all of that is very important. But nature is as you know, very varied and very distinct in those sort of things. Yeah. And some of the tribes, some are very old. I'll give you an idea of age. So we don't really know very well because you need detailed studies to determine how long fishes live. And I asked the question, does the fish live? And the answer is, of course, depends on the species. Some species, like I've just described, their whole life cycle is within a season or less an annual cycle. But some of them, of which we don't know many, we know some that are interested for aquaculture or they have other prominence that they've been studied by scientists. And we know them to live between, let's say, 10 and 15, maybe 20 years. The eel life cycle, for example, is mooted to be about a 15-year cycle, depending on where they are to see them. But most fish that have been studied in the lakes and dams of the area have about max of about 10 to 12 years, even the largest.
Okay.
But I caught a little squeaker fish in the Okavango in 1992, and I kept it in my aquarium, and I mention this in the book because it's extraordinary. And I had two of them, actually. The one died when he was about 20 years old.
Wow.
And the other, while I was preparing this book about a year or 2 years ago, he was 30 years old. And if you had said to me that fish about this, that long, lasted 30 years, yes, in a protected environment, yes, with all of those provisions, nonetheless, it lived for 30 years. People would have laughed at me.
They would indeed. But now I want to
Yeah.
get to when it was still known as the JLB Institute, and we all remember, those of us who know the story about Professor Smith will know about the coelacanth and the phone call that he got saying, "We found this fish. What is it, and what do we do with it?" Have you
Yes.
ever had a call like that when you pick up the phone and somebody now digitally sends you a fish picture and they go, "Paul, we have no idea what this is. We found it in the middle of the Karoo in sort of 2 drops of rainwater. What do we do with this thing?"
Yes. When you're David, when there are very few ichthyologists, there are lots of ornithologists, lots of mammalogists, and the reasons for that, of course, because fish are out of sight, out of mind.
Correct.
Most people don't think about it. So when you're a museum ichthyologist like I have been practically all my working life, you do get these strange calls that I have got this or I've got that. And always we have to say, well, did you get a specimen? If you didn't get it, did you get a photograph? If you didn't get a photograph, I can't really help you. Why? Because the public description and perception of what is rare or what is unusual or something like that, it might be a mutilated animal, it might be one that has been injured in its life and so forth. And that has often happened. I've sometimes been sent things like a catfish was got tough and hardy, but it was somehow cut in half and it survived. And they say this must be a new species because it's here. And so you get all sorts of wonderful and weird things being sent to you. And have I discovered the coelacanth in
A freshwater coelacanth. That could be interesting.
It doesn't really go, at this moment.
We're running out of time. This always happens. I get an interesting author like yourself, and I just want to talk for hours. But one question I ask all the authors that I interview. Now, your picture is on the back of this book.
Yes.
Do you go into a local bookstore and go, "Oh, look, there's a new book by Paul Skelton," standing like this type of thing? I wonder what it's like. And then turn to see if anybody is looking at you.
David, no.
No, okay.
That's the short answer. I go and obviously I'm curious about whether my book is on the shelf or not.
So if it's like not that on the shelf, then you'll turn it like that so people can see the cover.
Don't interfere with their presentation.
Oh, come on. It's just you and I, Paul. You can tell me the truth.
It's not a beautiful photograph. You've seen it. I've got a thing there. But it's a magnificent one, and I've got one on my wall. That very photograph taken by Jim.
It's a great.
Is going to say, "Wow, that's a new book. It's an interesting book." Yes. So they should present one copy like that.
Where is the book available? I take it it's available at bookstores. I don't know. Is this available as an electronic book?
Yes, it is available. So it's available both as an e-book, as they call it, and as not as hard covered, but as you've got it there. That's the only way.
Soft cover.
So all the big sellers, as far as I'm aware, exclusive books, bargain books, those sort of outlets, as far as I'm aware, they've got copies and so forth. And then specialist outlets like in national gardens, the national park shops, things like that. That sort of book.
That's one. And great to know.
Sorry?
I said it's great to know So people keep look out. If you're at one of the sand parks, have a look. If you're interested in fish, great book. It's published by Struik Nature. It's called Freshwater Fishes of Southern Africa, a complete guide. It's written by Professor Paul Skelton, Professor Emeritus, I should, if I want to be correct. Paul, thank you so very much for joining me on Off the Shelf. The time has just zipped by. Next time I find a small fish in my pond outside, I'll send you a photograph. You'll tell me what it is.
No, really. Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
My guest today on Off the Shelf has been Professor Emeritus Paul Skelton, and we've been talking about his brand new book. If you're looking for something for Christmas, or if you're looking for something just to gift to yourself and you're interested in fish, this is the one for you.